I stood at the back of the conference room, watching as my father's attorney slid the inheritance documents across the polished mahogany table toward my sister Meredith. $52 million. The entire family fortune, built over 3 generations, and all of it now belonged to her. My father sat beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, as he had done since we were children. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When his eyes finally met mine, there was no apology in them, only cold certainty. "Mavis," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment. "Meredith has always understood the importance of family legacy. She deserves this more than you ever could." What neither of them knew was that I had already discovered the truth about the money, about Meredith's secret dealings, and about the lies that had propped up our family name for decades. By tomorrow morning, they would understand exactly what I was capable of. The room felt suffocating despite its cavernous size. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Manhattan skyline, a view my father had purchased to impress his clients and business partners over the years. I'd been summoned here under the pretense of a family discussion regarding his estate planning. At 68, with a recent heart attack behind him, my father had finally decided to put his affairs in order. I should have known better than to expect fairness. "Is this a joke?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the rage building inside me. 20 years of working my way up from intern to CFO at a rival financial firm, and he still saw me as the family disappointment. Meredith's lips curved into that practiced smile, the same one she used in charity gala photographs in Society. Page features. "Mavis, be reasonable. Daddy's just being practical. The family business needs consistent leadership, and you've always been so independent." Independent. The code word they'd used for years when what they really meant was disloyal. Because I had refused to join Reynolds Financial. Because I had built my own life instead of accepting my predetermined role in my father's kingdom. "Practical would be dividing things equally between your 2 daughters," I said, addressing my father directly. "Or at least acknowledging the years I spent helping build the business before I left." My father's expression hardened. Lance Reynolds had built his reputation on being uncompromising, a quality Wall Street had rewarded him handsomely for. "The decision is made, Mavis. Meredith has dedicated her life to Reynolds Financial. She's earned this." I glanced at the attorney, Gabriel Morton, whose discomfort was evident in the way he shuffled papers unnecessarily. He had been our family, lawyer since before I was born, had watched us grow up, had seen the dynamic between Meredith and me evolve from childhood rivalry to something far more complicated. "And what about Mother's trust?" I asked. "The one she specifically set up to be divided equally?" A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed Gabriel's face before he composed himself. "That trust was consolidated into the main estate several years ago, with your father as the executor. Without my knowledge or consent," I added. "Is that even legal?" "It was all done according to the provisions in your mother's will," Gabriel replied, not quite meeting my eyes. The pieces fell into place then. "My mother had died 5 years ago after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. In her final days, heavily medicated and barely conscious, she had apparently signed documents I had never seen. Documents that gave my father control over her assets. Assets. That should have been split between Meredith and me." I turned my attention back to Meredith, studying her. At 35, 2 years my junior, she looked every inch the financial heiress in her tailored Chanel suit and pearls. The golden child, the dutiful daughter who had given up nothing and gained everything. "So that's it?" I asked. 52 million to Meredith, and nothing for me? Not even Mother's art collection or her personal effects. My father cleared his throat. "You'll receive your mother's jewelry collection, and the summer cottage in the Hamptons." The cottage. A dilapidated three-bedroom that hadn't been renovated since the 1980s, worth perhaps a fraction of a percent of the total estate. The insult was so blatant it was almost laughable. "How generous," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Meredith had the audacity to look offended. "Mavis, I know you're upset, but there's no need for that tone. This isn't personal. It's just business. Just business." The Reynolds family motto applied to everything from hostile takeovers to family betrayals. I wanted to scream, to flip. The antique table, to demand justice. But years in corporate boardrooms had taught me that showing emotion was the fastest way to lose leverage. So instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that should have warned them both, had they been paying attention. "You know what? Keep it," I said, gathering my coat and bag. "All of it. I've never needed your money, and I certainly don't need it now." Relief washed over my father's face. The crisis averted, the difficult daughter once again managed. He had always underestimated me, mistaking my independence for weakness. It was a mistake he would soon regret. "That's very mature of you, Mavis," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I'm glad you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied, pausing at the door. "More than you can imagine." As I walked out of the Reynolds Financial Building and into the crisp autumn air, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved 3 months ago, but never used. "Jack? It's Mavis Reynolds. About that information you found. I'm ready to move forward." Jack Porter, an investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing corporate corruption, had approached me earlier that year with questions about certain irregularities he'd uncovered at Reynolds Financial. Offshore accounts. Questionable transactions. Patterns that suggested decades of systematic fraud and tax evasion. I had hesitated then, family loyalty briefly overriding my sense of justice. But now, as I walked away from that conference room with nothing but a worthless cottage and my mother's jewelry, I felt no such constraint. My father and sister thought they knew me. They thought I would accept this final insult as I had accepted all the others with quiet dignity and eventual surrender. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my strategic restraint for lack of courage. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. Back in my apartment overlooking Central Park, purchased with my own money, earned through my own merit, I spread Jack's documents across my dining room table. Financial statements, internal memos, emails between my father and Meredith discussing ways to optimize tax positions through methods that were questionable at best, criminal at worst. And there, buried among the corporate malfeasance, was something even more damning. Evidence that Meredith had systematically manipulated my mother's medical care during her final illness, ensuring she was heavily sedated when signing the documents that revised her trust. The inheritance wasn't just unfair, it was fraudulent. I poured myself a glass of scotch and stared out at the city lights. By this time tomorrow, the Reynolds. Name would mean something very different in New York society. The golden legacy would be tarnished beyond repair. And Meredith, perfect, praised, prioritized Meredith, would finally understand what it felt like to lose everything. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the coming storm. Sometimes justice required sacrifice. Sometimes revenge was simply accountability by another name. Tomorrow would change everything. And I was finally ready. The alarm on my phone chimed at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had for the past 15 years. I didn't need it anymore. My body was so accustomed to the schedule that I usually woke minutes before the sound. But routines had saved me more than once, and I wasn't about to abandon them now. My Upper East Side apartment was exactly what you'd expect from someone in my position. Elegant but not ostentatious, impressive but not showy. Unlike my sister's mansion in the Hamptons or my father's penthouse overlooking the park, my home reflected who I actually was rather than who I wanted others to think I was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I went through my morning ritual with practiced efficiency, 40 minutes, of yoga and strength training, a quick shower, a carefully assembled breakfast of steel-cut oats, berries, and black coffee. By 7:15, I was dressed in a charcoal Armani suit, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, minimal makeup emphasizing my features without drawing attention to them. The uniform of a woman who wanted to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who would prefer she wasn't there. On my way out, I paused at the framed photo on my entryway table, my mother and me on my graduation day from Wharton. She was beaming with pride, her arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders. It was one of the few times I remembered her standing up to my father, insisting on attending my graduation, despite his remarks about encouraging Mavis's rebellion. 2 weeks later, she had backed down again, reverting to the peacekeeper role she'd perfected over 30 years of marriage. "I'm finally doing it, Mom," I whispered to the photograph. "What you never could." The offices of Blackwood Capital were 32 floors above Madison Avenue, a testament to steel, glass, and ambition. As CFO, I had a corner office with views of the city that rivaled my father's, though I'd earned mine through merit rather than inheritance. My assistant, Joy, intercepted me as I stepped off the elevator, already briefing me on the day ahead. "The Hong Kong team sent over the final reports on the merger. Trey wants to review them with you before the board call at 11, and Angela—" Taylor from the Times called again. "She's pretty insistent about getting a comment from you about the Reynolds Financial quarterly results." I accepted the coffee Joy handed me, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared Americano. "Tell Angela I'm not available to comment on a competitor's earnings. Direct her to our PR team if she needs a quote about the sector generally." Joy nodded, making a note. "And what about the charity gala this weekend? Your sister's office called to confirm your attendance. Apparently she's receiving some kind of humanitarian award." The Reynolds' annual charity gala had been a fixture of New York's social calendar for decades. My father had started it 30 years ago as a tax write-off that doubled as a networking opportunity, but over time, Meredith had transformed it into her personal branding platform. Every year she selected a photogenic cause, donated an impressive-sounding sum, always less than what the event cost to produce, and positioned herself as New York's most compassionate heiress. "Tell them, I'll be there," I said, surprising Joy, who knew how I felt about these events. "In fact, see if we can upgrade to a platinum sponsorship table." "That's $50,000, Joy pointed out cautiously. "I'm aware. Make it happen." In my office, I closed the door and opened my laptop. I had 4 hours before I needed to present at the board meeting. Plenty of time to finalize what I had been working on since leaving my father's office yesterday. The file Jack had compiled was comprehensive, the product of 8 months of investigation. Bank transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies that existed only on paper, falsified loan applications, tax documents that dramatically undervalued assets, and most damning of all, evidence that Reynolds Financial had been servicing accounts for several shell companies linked to international money laundering operations. Any one of these revelations would trigger investigations. All of them together would be catastrophic. I wasn't naive about the consequences. Reynolds Financial employed over 2,000 people, most of whom had no idea what was happening at the executive level. The company managed retirement funds for thousands more. When this broke, there would be collateral damage, jobs lost, investments devalued, reputations tarnished. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really prepared to bring down the company my grandfather had founded, that my father had built into an empire? Was my hurt pride worth the fallout? Then I remembered my mother's face in her final days, confused and sedated while Meredith guided her hand to sign documents she couldn't possibly understand. I remembered the casual cruelty in my father's voice. "She deserves this more than you ever could." My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Dinner at the Milton tonight. 8 p.m. Your sister has news to share. The Milton was where my father took clients he wanted to impress. Whatever Meredith's news was, it was important enough to warrant the full Reynolds performance. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," knowing it would surprise him. I had been declining family dinners for months. There was a knock at my door, and Trey entered without waiting for a response. A liberty granted by 15 years of friendship and professional partnership. As Blackwood's CEO, he was technically my boss, but our relationship had always been more collaborative than hierarchical. "You look like you're plotting something," he said, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "And knowing you, it's either brilliant or terrifying." I smiled despite myself. Trey had an uncanny ability to read me, a skill that had served us well when building Blackwood from a scrappy upstart to a legitimate competitor in the financial sector. "Can it be both?" I asked. "Usually is," he agreed, studying me with the intensity that had made him such a formidable negotiator. "This about the Reynolds thing? Joy mentioned your sister's office called." I had never told Trey the full story of my relationship with my family. He knew the broad strokes, that my father was Lance Reynolds, that my sister worked for the family business, that I had chosen a different path. But he didn't know about the decades of favoritism, the constant undermining, the systematic erasure of my contributions. "I found out yesterday that my father is leaving everything to Meredith," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The company, the real estate holdings, the investment portfolios, all of it." Trey whistled low. "That's significant. And by significant, I mean shitty." I appreciated that he didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me family wealth didn't matter. Trey had grown up poor in South Boston. He understood better than most that money was power, and being denied your share was about more than just the dollars. "I'm handling it," I said simply. "I have no doubt," he replied, then hesitated. "Just be careful, Mavis. Family stuff can get messy fast." If only he knew how messy it was about to get. The Milton was exactly as I remembered it. Dim lighting, dark wood paneling, waitstaff that appeared and disappeared like well-dressed ghosts. The kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices because if you needed to ask, you couldn't afford it. My father had reserved his usual table in the back corner, positioned perfectly to see everyone while making it difficult for others to overhear. Image and privacy, the twin obsessions of the truly wealthy. I spotted them immediately. My father, commanding attention even in stillness, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, Rolex glinting under the soft lighting. Meredith, animated as she spoke, gesturing with manicured hands. And beside her, Luca Harrington, her husband of 7 years, handsome in that generic way that old money seemed to cultivate, like a Ken doll with better tailoring. The surprise was the fourth person at the table. Gabriel Morton, our family attorney, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he sipped his scotch. His presence confirmed my suspicion that whatever Meredith's news was, it involved legal matters. "Mavis," my father acknowledged as I approached, not bothering to stand. "You're late." I checked my watch. "Actually, I'm 3 minutes early." Meredith rolled her eyes slightly. "He means you should have been here 15 minutes ago to have drinks first. You know how Daddy feels about punctuality." I slid into the empty chair, nodding a greeting to Gabriel, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. "My apologies. Some of us had actual work to finish before dinner." The barb landed exactly as intended. Neither my father nor Meredith had ever worked a day in their lives by my definition of the term. My father had inherited Reynolds Financial from his father, and Meredith had been installed as VP of Client Relations immediately after college, a title created specifically for her that required little more than looking pretty at business dinners and remembering clients' children's names. "Always so serious," my father said dismissively, signaling for the waiter. "You'd think running someone else's company would be less stressful than running your own." I accepted the glass of Bordeaux. The waiter poured without comment. This was familiar territory. The subtle digs, the implication that my achievements were somehow lesser because I hadn't followed the prescribed path. "So, what's the occasion?" I asked, looking directly at Meredith. Joy mentioned something about news. Meredith and Luca exchanged a glance, a private communication that ended with her giving a slight nod. "We wanted to share some exciting developments," Meredith began, her voice taking on the rehearsed quality she used for press interviews. "As you know, Daddy has been considering his legacy planning, particularly after his health scare last month." I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue. "Yes, we covered that rather thoroughly yesterday." My father shot me a warning look, which I pointedly ignored. "Well," Meredith continued, "Luca and I have decided to honor Daddy's legacy in a special way. We're establishing the Reynolds Foundation, a philanthropic organization that will ensure the family name continues to represent excellence and compassion for generations." I noted the specific wording, the family name, not our family. The by distinction was subtle but clear. This wasn't about preserving our collective legacy. It was about cementing their control over the narrative. "How generous," I said. "And what exactly will this foundation focus on?" "We'll start with educational initiatives," Luca chimed in, his voice carrying that slight European accent he emphasized. When trying to impress. Born in New Jersey to Italian immigrants, Luca had reinvented himself at boarding school, adopting the mannerisms and affectations of old money. Scholarships for underprivileged youth, funding for arts programs in public, schools, that sort of thing. All tax-deductible, of course, I noted. Gabriel cleared his throat. "The foundation will be funded initially with a significant endowment from your father, with additional assets transferred over time to minimize tax implications." Translation: my father had found yet another way to control his wealth while avoiding estate taxes. The foundation would allow him to maintain influence over the money even after death, with Meredith and Luca as the appointed stewards. "And who will serve on the board of this foundation?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Myself, Luca, Daddy until he no longer wishes to serve, and several of our close friends," Meredith replied. "We thought it best to keep the decision-making intimate, to preserve the family vision." Family vision. Another carefully chosen phrase, meant to exclude me while pretending to honor some collective ethos. "I see," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "And I assume yesterday's decision about the inheritance is related to this foundation?" My father set down his fork with a little too much force. "The foundation and the inheritance are separate matters, Mavis. Don't try to conflate them." "Are they, though?" I countered. "It seems like a convenient way to maintain control over assets while presenting the appearance of philanthropy. A tax strategy disguised as generosity." Meredith's perfect smile faltered slightly. "Why must you always be so cynical? This is about giving back, about making a difference." "Is it? Then why not establish it as a proper public charity with transparent governance? Why the closed board? Why the private control?" "Because we understand the Reynolds legacy," my father interjected, his tone sharpening. "We know what the family stands for." I leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly does the Reynolds family stand for, Father? What values are you so eager to perpetuate?" The tension at the table was palpable. Gabriel took a large gulp of his scotch, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I think what your father means," Luca intervened smoothly, "is that family foundations require a unified vision. The Reynolds name carries weight in certain circles, and that influence can do tremendous good when properly directed." "By properly directed, you mean controlled by you and Meredith," I clarified. "Mavis, enough," my father snapped. "This dinner was meant to be a celebration, not another opportunity for you to air your grievances." I set down my glass carefully. "I'm simply trying to understand the full picture. After all, this is about our family legacy, isn't it? Or is it just about your legacy, Father?" Meredith sighed dramatically. This is exactly why we didn't include you in the foundation planning. You always have to make everything so difficult. Difficult, I repeated, feeling a familiar heat rise in my chest. Is that what you call asking questions? Seeking transparency? Expecting fairness? There is nothing unfair about any of this, my father said dismissively. The foundation will benefit many people. The fact that you can't see beyond your own interest just confirms what I've always known. Meredith understands the responsibilities of wealth in a way you never have. There it was again, the same sentiment he had expressed yesterday. Meredith deserves this more than you. The familiar refrain of my childhood, now codified into legal documents and tax strategies. I looked at each of them in turn. My father, secure in his righteousness. Meredith, self-satisfied and smug. Luca, calculating behind his practiced charm. And Gabriel, complicit through his silence. In that moment, any lingering doubts I might have had about my plan evaporated completely. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about challenging a system of entitlement that had gone unchecked for too long. You know what? I said, my voice calm despite the anger coursing through me. You're right. I don't understand. Your vision for the Reynolds legacy. My mistake was thinking I had any place in it at all. I stood, dropping my napkin beside my barely touched plate. Mavis, don't be dramatic, Meredith huffed. Sit down and finish your dinner. I've lost my appetite, I replied. Then, looking directly at Gabriel, I added, some things are difficult to stomach. The attorney flinched slightly, confirming my suspicion that he knew exactly how questionable the entire arrangement was. As I walked away, I heard my father mutter, always has to make a scene. Some things never change. But he was wrong. Things were about to change dramatically, and none of them were prepared for what was coming. Instead of heading home, I directed my driver to take me to Brooklyn. The address Jack had given me led to an industrial building converted into lofts, the kind of place where journalists, artists, and other people who valued authenticity over luxury made their homes. Jack Porter lived on the third floor, in a space that managed to be both cluttered and meticulously organized. Stacks of files covered most horizontal surfaces, but I could tell each pile had a purpose, a system known only to him. Wasn't expecting you tonight, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Jack was in his 40s, with the permanent 5 o'clock shadow and perpetually rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about substance than style. He'd made his reputation exposing corporate malfeasance, which had earned him both awards and enemies. Plans changed, I replied, setting my bag on his counter. How quickly can we move on this? Jack raised an eyebrow. That depends on what moving on this means exactly. I've got enough for a solid series of articles, 3-part exposé, front-page material. But publishing means giving my editor a heads up, legal review, fact-checking. We're talking at least a week, maybe 2. I shook my head. Too long. I need this to break by Saturday. Saturday? Jack looked genuinely surprised. That's 3 days from now. Why the rush? I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Jack and I had a transactional relationship. I had provided information about industry practices that helped with his previous investigations, and in return, he had dug into Reynolds Financial when I'd expressed concerns about their operations. But we weren't friends, and I wasn't in the habit of sharing personal motivations. The annual Reynolds Charity Gala is Saturday night, I said finally. Every power player in New York finance will be there, along with politicians, celebrities, and social media influencers. Maximum visibility. Jack studied me with the shrewd assessment that had likely served him well in his career. This isn't just about exposing corporate fraud, is it? This is personal. Does it matter? I countered. The evidence is solid. The wrongdoing is real. Whether I have additional reasons for wanting it exposed shouldn't change the journalistic value. He conceded the point with a slight nod. Fair enough. But bypassing the normal editorial process isn't my call. I'd need to convince my editor this is time sensitive, that we risk being scooped if we wait. Tell her whatever you need to, I said. But make it happen. Jack ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. There's another option, but it's riskier. We could drop everything simultaneously. To select journalists at competing outlets, to financial regulators, to law enforcement. Create a tsunami of information that can't be contained or controlled. The idea had merit. Reynolds Financial had enough influence to possibly suppress or minimize a single outlet's reporting, but a coordinated release across multiple channels would be impossible to contain. Do it, I said. How much will it cost? Jack looked offended. I'm not asking for money. This is legitimate journalism, not a hit job. I'm not suggesting otherwise, I clarified. But expediting this will require resources. I'm offering to cover expenses, not pay for content. After some negotiation, we settled on an arrangement. Jack would work with trusted contacts to prepare a coordinated release for Saturday evening, timed to coincide with the height of the gala. I would cover the expenses needed to expedite the work, no strings attached regarding content. By the time I left Jack's loft, it was past midnight. The city had that peculiar quiet it only achieved in the small hours, not silent, never silent, but subdued. As my car navigated the nearly empty streets back to Manhattan, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision had been made. The wheels were in motion. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. Your dramatic exit was unnecessary. Daddy is upset. Call him tomorrow. I deleted it without responding. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a finger of scotch. The events of the evening played through my mind, each condescending remark and dismissive glance fueling my resolve. The foundation was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't just about my father playing favorites. It was about systematically erasing me from the family narrative while using the Reynolds name to shield questionable activities. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Trey. How'd dinner go? Should I have bail money ready? I smiled despite myself. Still free, but it was a close call. Talk tomorrow. I moved to my home office and opened my laptop. If Jack was going to deliver on Saturday, I needed to prepare for the aftermath. The expose would be just the beginning. There would be regulatory investigations, possibly criminal charges, certainly civil lawsuits from investors and clients. Reynolds Financial would face an existential crisis, and I needed to ensure Blackwood Capital was positioned not just to weather the storm, but to benefit from it. I worked until nearly 3 a.m., drafting strategies for approaching Reynolds clients. After the news broke, preparing talking points for our PR team, and identifying key accounts to target. It wasn't enough to bring down my father's company. I wanted to build something better in its place. When I finally went to bed, exhaustion overrode the adrenaline that had been sustaining me. But sleep remained elusive. Instead, my mind kept returning to my mother's final days. Camilla Reynolds had been the counterbalance to my father's coldness throughout my childhood. Not powerful enough to change the family dynamic entirely, but a quiet source of support when his criticism became too harsh. She had been the one to encourage my independence, to suggest that perhaps I could forge my own path, rather than fighting for a place where I wasn't wanted. Your father's world is so small, Mavis, she had told me once. He can only see value in things that reflect himself, but you were always meant for something different. In her final weeks, as cancer ravaged her body, she had asked to speak with me privately. But whenever I visited, she was either asleep or so heavily medicated she could barely focus. Meredith was always there, managing the nurses, controlling, access, making decisions about her care. By the time my mother died, whatever she had wanted to tell me remained unspoken. I had grieved her passing, but accepted it as the natural conclusion to a long illness. It was only later, when reviewing the timeline of the trust's consolidation, that I began to question whether Meredith's management of our mother's care had been motivated by more than filial concern. The documents my mother supposedly signed were dated just 3 days before her death, when, according to the nurse's logs I had obtained, she was receiving the highest doses of morphine and barely conscious. Morning came too quickly. I dragged myself into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the physical tension, if not the emotional weight. Today would be crucial, putting all the pieces in place while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. As I dressed for work, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. Was I really prepared to destroy everything my grandfather and father had built? To potentially implicate Meredith in criminal activity? To upend the lives of Reynolds' financial employees who had nothing to do with the corruption at the top? Then I remembered my father's words. She deserves this more than you. And Meredith's smug certainty. This is exactly why we didn't include you. The doubt vanished, replaced by cold determination. They had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. The inequality between Meredith and me wasn't something that developed overnight. It had been carefully cultivated over decades, a garden of favoritism that my father had tended with meticulous attention. I was 7 when I first realized something was different about how my father treated us. It was my birthday, and I had received a chemistry set I'd been coveting for months. Thrilled, I'd set it up on the dining room table, eager to show my father my first experiment when he returned from work. "Daddy doesn't want to see your silly experiments," Meredith had said, 5 years old and already attuned to the family hierarchy. "He's tired from important business." When he arrived home, he'd barely glanced at my carefully arranged vials and beakers. "Very nice, Mavis," he'd muttered, before turning his full attention to Meredith, who was showing him a crude drawing she'd made. He'd examined it as if it were a Picasso, exclaiming over her use of color, her creativity, her special talent. That night, I'd packed away the chemistry set, understanding without being told that my interests would never be important enough to warrant my father's genuine attention. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. When I earned straight A's, it was expected. When Meredith managed a B, it was celebrated. When I was accepted to Wharton on my own merits, my father suggested it was because Reynolds Financial had endowed a building there. When Meredith was admitted to Columbia despite mediocre grades and test scores, it was because she was extraordinary. Our grandfather, Harrison Reynolds, had founded Reynolds Financial as a small investment firm in the post-war boom. Through shrewd investments and carefully cultivated political connections, he had built it into a respectable mid-sized company. My father had taken over in the 1980s, capitalizing on deregulation and expanding aggressively. By the time I was in college, Reynolds Financial was managing billions in assets and had offices in 6 countries. I had always assumed I would join the family business. Despite my father's indifference, I had a genuine interest in finance and a talent for numbers that even he couldn't deny. I'd structured my education accordingly: finance major, summer internships at competing firms to learn different approaches, even learning Mandarin to prepare for the growing Chinese market. The summer after my junior year, I finally secured an internship at Reynolds Financial, certain that once my father saw me in a professional context, he would recognize my value. Instead, I discovered that Meredith, who was still in her freshman year and had shown zero interest in finance, had been given a special advisory role that essentially meant shadowing my father to important meetings while I was relegated to basic analyst work. Still, I persevered. After graduation, I accepted a full-time position at Reynolds, determined to work my way up on merit. For 3 years, I arrived first and left last, took on the most challenging projects, and consistently outperformed my peers. Then came the Morgan acquisition, a deal I had identified, researched, and structured almost entirely on my own. It was set to be the largest in the company's history, potentially increasing our assets under management by 30% overnight. The night before the final presentation to the board, I had stayed late, triple-checking the projections and refining my slides. Around midnight, I'd gone to my father's office to place the final proposal on his desk for review. That's when I saw them. My slides, my projections, my deal structure, all with the header changed to Presented by Meredith Reynolds, Director of Strategic Acquisitions. A title that hadn't existed until that moment. A role created specifically to give Meredith credit for my work. When confronted, my father hadn't even bothered to deny it. The board responds better to Meredith, he had said simply. She has the charisma this kind of presentation needs. You're too technical, too detailed. You'll get internal credit, of course. I had resigned the next day. Within a week, I had accepted a position at Blackwood Capital, then a hungry upstart firm looking to disrupt the established players. Within 5 years, I had risen to CFO, helping transform Blackwood into a legitimate competitor to Reynolds Financial. My mother had been caught in the middle throughout it all. Camilla Reynolds had come from old money but little personal wealth. Her family's fortune had been largely depleted. By the time she came of age, she had been raised to be decorative and agreeable, to support her husband's ambitions and raise children who would continue the family legacy. She loved both Meredith and me, but in different ways. With Meredith, she shared shopping trips, charity, committee memberships, and the easy camaraderie of two women who understood and accepted their prescribed roles in society. With me, the connection was more complex, a mixture of bewilderment at my ambition and quiet pride in my refusal to accept limitations. Your father doesn't understand women like you, she confided once, after he had belittled my decision to turn down a prestigious finance fellowship in favor of a riskier position with greater responsibility. He thinks women should be like flowers, in a garden, beautiful, decorative, neatly contained. You're more like a vine that keeps climbing over the walls he tries to build around you. As my career flourished at Blackwood, my relationship with my family settled into a strained detente. I attended major holidays and significant events, endured my father's dismissive comments about our little competitor, and watched as Meredith was elevated to increasingly prominent positions at Reynolds Financial despite her limited qualifications. When my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the fragile piece fractured further. Meredith immediately positioned herself as the primary caregiver, controlling access to our mother and information about her condition. My attempts to participate in her care were rebuffed with claims that I was too busy or that my presence upset Mother. In the final weeks, Meredith had moved into our parents' penthouse, ostensibly to provide round-the-clock support. My visits were restricted to specific hours, always with Meredith or a nurse present. My mother, increasingly sedated as the pain intensified, rarely managed more than a few minutes of lucid conversation. Only once did we have a moment alone, when Meredith stepped out to take a call. My mother had gripped my hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "The safety deposit box," she had whispered urgently. "You need to check." Meredith had returned before she could finish, and by my next visit, my mother was barely conscious. She died 3 days later, without ever completing that crucial message. In my grief, I had forgotten about the interrupted revelation. It was only months later, going through personal papers, that I remembered and began searching for information about any safety deposit box my mother might have maintained. After weeks of discreet investigation, I discovered she had indeed kept a box at First Manhattan Bank for over 30 years. But when I tried to access it as her daughter and presumed heir, I was informed that the box had been emptied 2 days after her death by Meredith, who had presented documentation naming her as the authorized representative. Whatever my mother had wanted me to find was gone, and Meredith had made sure I would never know what it was. Until now. Because what Meredith didn't realize was that banks keep records, and Jack Porter had sources in banking who owed him favors. And one of those sources had provided a detailed inventory of the box's contents as recorded when it was opened. Among those contents, a USB drive labeled Reynolds Financial Contingency, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting, items I had never seen, information that had been deliberately kept from me. Another piece of my inheritance stolen by my sister. My mother, it seemed, had left me something after all, and Meredith had made sure I never received it. The next morning, I called the one person who had known my mother longer than anyone else, her college roommate and lifelong friend, Angela Winters. Angela had never quite fit into my parents' social circle. A literature professor at NYU with a penchant for brutal honesty, she had maintained her friendship with my mother despite my father's thinly veiled disapproval. She had been a fixture at holidays when I was young, though her visits had become less frequent as my father's control over the family tightened. We met at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, far from the midtown haunts frequented by the Reynolds' social set. At 72, Angela remained striking. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob, vibrant scarves, and the kind of posture that came from decades of commanding lecture halls. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, studying me over, the rim of her espresso cup. "Though I suppose finding out you've been disinherited would do that to anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "How did you know about that?" "Your father called me," she replied, surprising me. "Wanted me to talk some sense into you after your dramatic exit from dinner. Seems to think I still have some influence over you, Reynolds. Women." "And what did you tell him?" A small smile played at her lips. "That he was a patriarchal dinosaur who deserved whatever was coming to him." I couldn't help but laugh. Angela had never been intimidated by Lance Reynolds, a quality that had probably sustained her friendship with my mother all those years. "I need to ask you about something," I said, lowering my voice. "Did my mother ever mention a safety deposit box to you? Something she kept separate from my father's knowledge?" Angela's expression shifted subtly. "Camilla had her secrets. We all do, especially women married to controlling men." She stirred her coffee slowly. "What have you found out?" I explained about the interrupted conversation, the discovery of the box, and Meredith's swift removal of its contents after our mother's death. Angela was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother started keeping that box around the time your grandfather died," she finally said. "I helped her set it up. Harrison had pulled her aside at the funeral, told her something that left her shaken. She never shared the specifics with me, but she began collecting documents, making copies of certain files from your father's home office." "What kind of documents?" "Financial records mostly. Board minutes. Correspondence with certain clients." Angela shrugged. "I'm an English professor, Mavis. The details meant nothing to me." "But Camilla was worried. About your father's business practices, about what would happen if certain things came to light." My heart raced. This confirmed what I had suspected. My mother had been gathering evidence, creating a record of Reynolds' financial's questionable activities, and she had wanted me to have that information. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not Meredith?" Angela's laugh was sharp. "Meredith is your father's daughter in every way that matters. Camilla loved her, but she harbored no illusions about her character." She reached across the table, covering my hand with her own. "You were always the one she trusted to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult." I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my throat. Did she know? About what Meredith might do? "Your mother was dying. Not blind," Angela said bluntly. "She saw how Meredith hovered, how she managed access, how she whispered with your father when they thought Camilla was sleeping. She knew something was happening, even if she couldn't stop it. A wave of grief washed over me, not just for my mother's death, but for her awareness in those final days, her desperate attempt to warn me, to arm me with the truth." "Thank you," I said, gathering my composure. "This helps more than you know." Angela studied me intently. "You're planning something, aren't you? Something that will upset the careful world Lance and Meredith have constructed. I didn't deny it. They've made their choices. Now they'll live with the consequences. Good, she said simply. Camilla would approve. Back at the office, I found Trey waiting in my office, feet propped on my desk as he scrolled through his phone. Make yourself at home, I said dryly, removing his feet with a gentle push. Already did, he replied, unperturbed. You've got the better view. He pocketed his phone, his expression turning serious. So, are we going to talk about why you've been meeting with Jack Porter? Or should I pretend I don't know about that? Shouldn't have been surprised that Trey knew. Despite his casual demeanor, he maintained an extensive network of contacts throughout the industry. Nothing significant happened in New York finance without him hearing about it eventually. It's complicated, I hedged. It's about Reynolds, he countered. And whatever you've got planned is happening soon, judging by the urgency of your meetings. I sighed, closing the door to ensure privacy. Reynolds Financial is about to face some significant challenges. I'm making sure we're positioned to weather the fallout. Trey's eyes narrowed. What kind of challenges are we talking about? Regulatory? Legal? Public relations disaster? All of the above. He whistled low. And you know this because I've been gathering evidence of their wrongdoing for months, I admitted. And now I'm making sure that evidence reaches the right people. Trey was quiet for a moment, processing. This is about more than business competition, isn't it? This is personal. Does that matter? It matters if it clouds your judgment, he said bluntly. Look, I've got no love for Reynolds Financial or your father. The man's an egotistical asshole who treats most of the industry like peasants beneath his notice. But scorched earth tactics have a way of burning the person holding the match. His concern was valid. Trey wasn't just my boss. He was the closest thing I had to a true ally in this industry. We had built Blackwood together, transforming it from a niche player to a legitimate force. He deserved honesty. My father is leaving. Everything to Meredith, I explained. The company, the properties, the investments, all of it. And they've been systematically engaged in financial fraud, tax evasion, and possible money laundering for years. My mother knew, tried to warn me before she died, but Meredith made sure that warning never reached me. Trey's expression darkened. Are you sure about the criminal activity? That's not something you throw around lightly. I'm sure, I said firmly. Jack has verified everything independently. This isn't speculation or sour grapes. It's documented fact. He nodded slowly. All right. If you're sure, I'm with you. But we need to be strategic about this. If Reynolds Financial implodes, it will send shockwaves through the entire industry. We need to protect our clients, our assets. I've already started working on contingency plans, I assured him. Detailed briefs for our legal team, talking points for client calls, liquidity projections for market volatility. A slow smile spread across Trey's face. This is why you're CFO. Always 3 steps ahead. He stood, straightening his jacket. Keep me in the loop. Whatever you need, resources, contacts, just an ear to vent to. I'm here. As he reached the door, he paused. Just one question. Why now? You've been competing with your father's company for years. What changed? I considered how much to reveal. I found out they falsified documents related to my mother's estate. They stole something that was meant for me. Trey nodded, understanding in his eyes. Well then, let's make sure they regret that decision. After he left, I turned to the window, looking out at the city stretched below. Trey's support meant more than I wanted to admit. This path I had chosen was isolating, fueled by hurt and betrayal, but ultimately necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Meeting set with SEC contact tomorrow, 7 a.m. Need you there. The Securities and Exchange Commission. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Once they were involved, there would be no turning back. I texted a simple confirmation, then added another message to my calendar. Reynolds Charity Gala, Saturday, 7 p.m. The event where everything would come to a head, where the carefully constructed facade of Reynolds family philanthropy would crumble before the eyes of New York society. Just 2 days away. The SEC offices were deliberately nondescript, housed in a government building that blended seamlessly with the corporate architecture surrounding it. At 6:55 a.m., I passed through security and was escorted to a conference room where Jack was already waiting, along with a woman I didn't recognize. Mavis Reynolds, Jack introduced. Meet Camilla Joy, senior enforcement attorney with the SEC. I froze momentarily at the name. Camilla, like my mother. She was younger than I expected for her position, perhaps early 40s, with the precise manner of someone who had built her career on attention to detail. Ms. Reynolds, she acknowledged, gesturing for me to sit. Mr. Porter has shared some concerning information about Reynolds Financial. I understand you have additional context to provide. For the next 2 hours, I walked her through everything I knew. The suspicious transactions I had observed during my time at the company, the patterns that had continued after my departure, the discrepancies in public filings compared to internal documents I had legally obtained. Camilla took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but otherwise listening without revealing her thoughts. When I finished, she gathered her papers and fixed me with a penetrating stare. You understand that once this investigation is formally opened, there's no stopping it. Reynolds Financial will be subject to extensive scrutiny, possible trading, restrictions, and potential criminal referrals if the evidence warrants it. I understand, I confirmed. And you're prepared to go on record? To provide sworn testimony if necessary? Yes, she nodded, seemingly satisfied. One more question, Ms. Reynolds. Given your family connection, I have to ask, what's your motivation here? Why now after all these years? It was the question I had been expecting, the one I had prepared for. I recently discovered evidence that senior management at Reynolds Financial, including my father and sister, deliberately concealed information from the estate of Camilla Reynolds, my mother, information that detailed financial improprieties and potentially illegal activities. So, this is personal, she stated not unkindly. The timing is personal, I clarified. The substance is factual and independently verifiable. Camilla Joy studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Based on what you've provided, I'll be opening a formal investigation today. You should expect significant developments within 48 hours. Just in time for the gala. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. After she left, Jack turned to me, his expression serious. You did well, but you should prepare yourself. This is going to move quickly now, and it's going to get ugly. I nodded. The reality of what I had set in motion finally sinking in. I need to make one more stop before I go back to the office. First Manhattan Bank was housed in a historic building in the financial district, its marble columns and ornate ceiling speaking to old money and discretion. I approached the manager's desk, where a middle-aged man looked up with a practiced smile. I'd like information about a safety deposit box that was maintained by my mother, Camilla Reynolds, I stated, sliding my ID across the desk. His smile faltered slightly. I'll need to check our records. One moment, please. While he typed, I surveyed the ornate lobby, wondering how many times my mother had stood in this very spot, depositing her secret evidence, building her case against my father one document at a time. Ah, yes, the manager said, looking up from his screen. Box 4721. It was closed approximately 5 years ago, shortly after Mrs. Reynolds' passing. Do you maintain records of what was in the box when it was closed? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He hesitated. We do keep an inventory, for security purposes, but I'm afraid I can't share that information without proper authorization. I slid a document across the desk. A court order I had obtained through expedited legal channels, authorizing me to access all records related to my mother's accounts as part of an estate review. The manager examined it carefully, then nodded, reluctantly. "Please wait here." He returned 10 minutes later with a sealed envelope. "This is the inventory record from when the box was closed, along with copies of the identification provided by the person who emptied it." I thanked him and took the envelope to a private consultation room the bank provided for customers. Inside, I found exactly what I expected: a detailed list of the box's contents and a photocopy of Meredith's driver's license. The inventory confirmed what Jack's source had indicated: a USB drive, an envelope addressed to me, various financial documents, and something I hadn't known about: a small journal with my mother's monogram, all of it now in Meredith's possession. All of it deliberately kept from me, but the inventory provided something else: the serial number of the USB drive. A small detail, easily overlooked, but potentially crucial. I immediately called Jack. "I need you to find something," I said without preamble. "A USB drive with this serial number." I read it to him carefully. "It was last in my sister's possession 5 years ago." "That's a needle in a haystack," Jack objected. "Even if it still exists, how would I possibly track it down?" "Because my sister never throws anything away," I explained. "She's pathologically incapable of discarding potential leverage. That drive is somewhere in her possession, either at her home or in her office at Reynolds Financial." "And you expect me to what? Break in and steal it?" he asked incredulously. "No," I said. "I expect you to use those investigative journalist skills you're so proud of. Find someone who has access: a housekeeper, an assistant, someone who can legally be in those spaces." "Even if I could," Jack said, "why risk it? We already have enough evidence to trigger the SEC investigation." "Because that drive doesn't just contain evidence of financial crimes," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "It contains my mother's contingency plan, something she created specifically to protect me if things went wrong." I couldn't explain how I knew this with certainty, but the conviction was unshakable. My mother, always careful, always watching, had created a failsafe, and she had intended for me to have it. "I'll see what I can do," Jack finally agreed. "But I make no promises." As I left the bank, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Gabriel." "Morton." The family attorney's voice was strained, anxious. "I need to speak with you, in person. It's about your mother's estate." My pulse quickened. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," he insisted. "Please. It's important." We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our offices. Neutral territory, away from both Reynolds Financial and Blackwood Capital. Gabriel was already there when I arrived, nervously turning a paper cup in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. "I've been struggling with this decision for years, but after the meeting about the foundation, I can't in good conscience remain silent any longer." "What decision?" I asked, studying him carefully. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. My name was written on it in my mother's distinctive handwriting. "Your mother gave this to me a week before she died," Gabriel explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "She made me promise to give it to you if anything happened to her will or trust. She was concerned about certain pressures being exerted by your father and sister." I stared at the envelope, hardly daring to believe what I was seeing. "And you've kept it all this time? Despite knowing her concerns were valid?" Gabriel had the grace to look ashamed. "Your father has been my client for 30 years. I convinced myself I was bound by attorney-client privilege, that the changes to the trust were legally executed, if ethically questionable." "What changed?" He met my eyes directly for the first time. "I saw your face when they announced the foundation. The same foundation your mother specifically didn't want created because she knew it would be used to shield certain activities from scrutiny." He pushed the envelope toward me. "I should have given you this years ago. I'm sorry." With slightly trembling hands, I took the envelope, the letter my mother had wanted me to have, the one Meredith had ensured never reached me. Whatever was inside could change everything. I waited until I was alone in my office, door locked, blinds drawn, before opening my mother's letter. The paper inside was crisp and expensive, the kind my mother always used for important correspondence. Her handwriting was steady, showing no signs of the illness that would soon claim her life. "My dearest Mavis, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized. I've asked Gabriel to deliver this letter only if something happens to alter the provisions of my trust. Provisions I've carefully established to ensure you receive your fair share of what I leave behind. What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to believe, but it is the truth, documented and verified to the best of my ability. Shortly after your grandfather's death, he left me with a warning about certain practices at Reynolds Financial that troubled him deeply. He believed your father was moving the company in a dangerous direction, taking risks and making compromises that Harrison would never have sanctioned. At first, I dismissed his concerns as the worries of an aging man resistant to change. But as the years passed, I began to notice discrepancies. Conversations that ended abruptly when I entered a room, documents hastily concealed, unusual patterns in the family finances. When you joined Reynolds Financial, I hoped you might see what I was seeing might help guide the company back toward ethical practices. Instead, I watched as you were systematically undermined, your contributions dismissed, your potential squandered. I began collecting evidence, financial statements, board minutes, correspondence that suggested increasingly questionable activities. The more I discovered, the more concerned I became, not just for the company's future, but for our family's legacy, and most importantly, for you. Meredith has always been your father's daughter, willing to compromise principles for advancement, to sacrifice integrity for approval. But you, Mavis, you have always been different, stronger, more principled, more like Harrison than Lance could ever be. I've placed the evidence I've gathered in a safety deposit box at First Manhattan Bank. The key is enclosed with this letter. Should anything happen to me, this information belongs to you. Use it as you see fit, but know that whatever you decide, I trust your judgment implicitly. There is one more thing you should know. Harrison left a provision in the original company charter, one that few remember. In the event of criminal malfeasance by the CEO, control of the company reverts to the board, with preference given to any qualifying family member who was not implicated in the wrongdoing. You are that family member, Mavis, the only one with both the qualifications and the integrity to lead Reynolds Financial out of whatever trouble Lance has created. I'm sorry for not being stronger, for not challenging your father more directly during my life. Perhaps if I had, things would be different now. But I hope this final act might help balance the scales that have been unfairly weighted against you for too long. With all my love, Mother enclosed with the letter was a small key, presumably to a new safety deposit box my mother had established before her death, one that Meredith didn't know about. I read the letter 3 times, my mind racing. The provision in the company charter was revolutionary information, a failsafe my grandfather had created that could potentially put me in control of Reynolds Financial if my father was found guilty of criminal activity. But the key, what did it open? Where was this second safety deposit box? I examined it closely. Unlike modern bank keys, this one was older, more ornate, the kind used for older establishments that prided themselves on tradition over innovation. Then I noticed the small engraving on the bow of the key, FCT. First Century Trust, one of the oldest private banks in the city, catering exclusively to families with generational wealth. My mother's family had banked there for over 100 years. I checked my watch. If I hurried, I could make it there. Before closing. First Century Trust occupied a historic brownstone on the Upper East Side, its discreet brass plaque the only indication of the billions in assets managed within its walls. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, the decor reminiscent of an English gentleman's club. All dark wood, leather chairs, and oil paintings of stern-looking founders. The manager, a woman in her 60s with impeccable posture and pearls that had likely witnessed the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, greeted me by name, Ms. Reynolds. What an unexpected pleasure. It's been some time since we've seen a member of your family. I presented the key without preamble. I believe my mother, Camilla Reynolds, maintained a safety deposit box here. Her eyes registered recognition, but her expression remained neutral. Indeed. If you'll follow me, please. She led me through a series of corridors to a room lined with antique brass box fronts. Using her master key along with mine, she opened a medium-sized drawer and discreetly withdrew, leaving me alone with its contents. Inside was a single USB drive, similar to the one from my mother's other safety deposit box, but newer, and a handwritten note that simply read, "The complete record. Use when necessary." I pocketed both and returned to my office, anxiety and anticipation battling for dominance. Whatever was on this drive, my mother had considered it important enough to secure separately from her other evidence to ensure it wouldn't fall into Meredith's hands. With trembling fingers, I inserted the drive into my laptop, holding my breath as the files populated on my screen. There were dozens of them, meticulously organized by date and category. The first folder contained financial statements, both the public versions filed with regulators and the actual internal figures, showing dramatic discrepancies. Another held emails between my father and several clients whose names I recognized from investigations into international money laundering operations. But it was the third folder that made my blood run cold. Labeled simply Meredith, it contained documented evidence of my sister's direct involvement in falsifying records, manipulating my mother's medical care to ensure she was heavily sedated when legal documents were presented, and even forging signatures on critical paperwork. The final folder was different, a single video file titled, "For Mavis." When I clicked on it, my mother's face filled the screen. She looked tired but clear-eyed, determined. "Mavis," she began, her voice stronger than I remembered from her final days. "If you're watching this, then things have gone as I feared. I've made this recording to ensure you hear the truth from me directly." For the next 20 minutes, she detailed everything. How my father had systematically looted client accounts to cover trading losses, how Meredith had become his willing accomplice, how they had worked together to isolate me from the family. Business when I began asking uncomfortable questions. "Your father believes wealth justifies everything," she said toward the end. "That rules are for those without the power to break them. He's groomed Meredith to continue this legacy, to preserve the Reynolds fortune at any cost." She paused, her expression softening. "But you, Mavis, you are Harrison's true heir, the only one who understands that wealth without integrity is merely corruption with better real estate." A small, sad smile. "I've done what I can to protect you, to arm you with the truth. The rest is in your hands." The video ended, leaving me staring at a black screen, tears streaming down my face. My mother had known all along, had fought in her own quiet way to ensure justice would eventually prevail. I wiped my eyes and pulled out my phone, typing a message to Trey. "Need emergency. Meeting. My office. Now." While waiting for him, I called Jack. "I have it," I said without preamble. "Everything we need and more. Documented evidence of criminal activity by both my father and Meredith, including manipulation of my mother's medical care to facilitate forgery." Jack let out a low whistle. "That changes everything. The SEC won't just be looking at financial crimes now. This crosses into elder abuse, medical fraud, possibly even criminal conspiracy. I want this included in Saturday's release, I instructed. All of it. Are you sure? He asked quietly. This goes beyond exposing corporate malfeasance. This will destroy your family completely. I thought of my mother's face in that video, her quiet determination to ensure the truth would eventually come to light. They stopped being my family the moment they decided I was disposable, I replied. Send everything to your contacts. And make sure the medical manipulation is highlighted. I want Meredith's role in this to be abundantly clear. Trey arrived minutes after I ended the call, looking concerned. When I showed him what I had discovered, the financial fraud, the medical manipulation, the forged documents, and finally, the provision in the company charter, his expression transformed from concern to disbelief to something approaching awe. This is... He struggled to find the words. This isn't just evidence of criminal activity. This is a roadmap to taking control of Reynolds Financial. I nodded. If the board invokes the provision my grandfather included, I'm the only family member qualified to assume leadership who isn't implicated in the wrongdoing. Trey leaned back, processing the implications. You could end up running both Blackwood and Reynolds. That's not my goal, I clarified. I want justice, not an empire. But I won't deny that the possibility of reclaiming my grandfather's company, of restoring it to ethical operation, has a certain poetic justice to it. So what's the plan? Trey asked, his expression now focused, strategic. We've got less than 48 hours until the gala. I outlined my strategy, the coordinated release of information to regulators, law enforcement, and key media outlets, timed to coincide with the height of the charity gala. The evidence on the thumb drive would be distributed to ensure maximum impact and minimum possibility of suppression. And what about you? Trey asked. Where will you be when all this breaks? I smiled, the first genuine smile in days. At the gala, of course, watching it all unfold in person. Friday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. The pieces were in motion, the strategy set. Now came the execution. Jack had confirmed that his contacts at major financial publications, regulatory agencies, and law enforcement were all prepared to move simultaneously tomorrow night. The timing was critical. Maximum impact required coordination. But there was one loose end I hadn't anticipated. At 9:30 a.m., my assistant Joy appeared at my door, looking uncomfortable. Your sister is here, she said, her tone conveying both surprise and concern. She's quite insistent on seeing you. Meredith at Blackwood Capital? This was unexpected. In all the years since I'd left Reynolds Financial, she had never once set foot in my professional domain. Send her in, I said, quickly securing my laptop and clearing sensitive documents from my desk. Meredith swept in like she owned the place, dressed in a powder blue Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of sisterly concern. Mavis, she began, accepting the seat I gestured to. I've been worried about you since dinner the other night. You seemed upset. I maintained a neutral expression. Did I? I thought I was quite composed, considering the circumstances. She sighed, arranging herself more comfortably. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've always taken everything so personally. The inheritance, the foundation. These are business decisions, not emotional ones. Disinheriting your daughter and sister is absolutely personal, I countered. Let's not pretend otherwise. Daddy is just trying to protect the Reynolds legacy, she insisted. You've never shown the same commitment to the family name that I have. I almost laughed at the irony. Is that what you call it? Commitment to the family name? Something flickered in her eyes. Caution, perhaps. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said smoothly. I'm just surprised to see you here. What do you want, Meredith? She studied me for a moment, as if trying to gauge my mood. I wanted to make sure you're still coming to the gala tomorrow. Daddy noticed you upgraded to a platinum sponsorship. It was unexpected. Of course they had noticed. The platinum sponsorship wasn't just expensive. It came with premium seating near the main stage, guaranteed media coverage, and explicit recognition during the program. It was visibility I had traditionally avoided at these events. I'll be there, I confirmed. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Meredith's eyes narrowed slightly. Good. I'm receiving the Humanitarian Leadership Award, you know. It would mean a lot to have family present. I wondered if she actually believed her own performance, the devoted daughter, the generous philanthropist, the concerned sister. Had she told herself these lies so often that they had become her truth? Congratulations, I said, my tone deliberately flat. Is that all? I have a meeting in 10 minutes. She stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands. Actually, there is one more thing. Daddy and I were talking, and we feel terrible about how things have unfolded with the inheritance. This was unexpected. I waited, curious to see where she was going with this. We've decided to establish a special position for you within the new foundation, she continued. Director of Financial Oversight. It comes with a generous stipend and would give you a voice in how the foundation's assets are managed. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. After everything, the disinheritance, the lies, the manipulation, they were offering me a symbolic position with a generous stipend, as if that could possibly compensate for what they had taken from me. Why now? I asked finally. Meredith's smile didn't reach her eyes. We've always valued your financial acumen, Mavis. This way, you can still contribute to the family legacy without the challenges that come with direct involvement in Reynolds Financial. The subtext was clear. They were worried. Something had made them nervous enough to extend this pathetic olive branch. Perhaps Gabriel had confessed to giving me my mother's letter. Perhaps they had detected the stirrings of the SEC investigation. Whatever the reason, they were trying to buy me off. I'll think about it, I lied, wanting to end the conversation before I said something that would alert her to my plans. Please, do, she said, reaching across the desk to squeeze my hand briefly. Family should stick together, Mavis, despite our differences. After she left, I sat motionless, processing the interaction. This unexpected visit was concerning. If they were already attempting to placate me, they might be more alert to threats than I had anticipated. I called Jack immediately. They're nervous, I told him without preamble. Meredith just came to my office offering me a position with their new foundation. They're trying to bring me back into the fold. That's not good, Jack replied, his voice tense. If they're reaching out like this, they might suspect something's coming. We should accelerate the timeline. No, I said firmly. We stick to the original plan. The gala is the perfect moment. They'll be surrounded by the very people they've been trying to impress for years. Maximum visibility, maximum impact. If you're sure, he said, sounding unconvinced. But be careful. People like your father and sister can be dangerous when cornered. After ending the call, I received an email from Gabriel Morton, the subject line simply urgent. The message was brief. They know I spoke with you. Proceed with caution. Will not be at gala. So Gabriel had been questioned. That explained Meredith's sudden appearance and the transparently inadequate peace offering. My father and sister were scrambling, trying to neutralize what they perceived as a potential threat. I forwarded the email to Jack and Trey, then made a decision. If my family was already on alert, I needed to ensure they had no reason to suspect the scale of what was coming. I needed to lull them into a false sense of security. I picked up my phone and called Meredith. I've thought about your offer, I said when she answered. I'm interested, but I'd like to discuss the details further. Perhaps at the gala tomorrow? The relief in her voice was palpable. That's wonderful, Mavis. Yes, we can absolutely talk tomorrow. Daddy will be so pleased. I'm sure he will, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. See you tomorrow night. Next, I called Joy into my office. I need you to clear my schedule for the afternoon and contact that personal shopper we've used for client gifts. I need a gown for tomorrow night, something memorable. If I was going to witness my family's downfall, I intended to look spectacular doing it. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparations. I reviewed the final evidence package Jack had assembled, confirmed the timing of the coordinated release with Trey, and arranged for additional security at Blackwood's offices as a precaution. By evening, everything was set, except for one final detail. At 7 p.m., I made my way to a small restaurant in the West Village, where Angela Winters was waiting. I had called her earlier, asking if she would accompany me to the gala. As my mother's closest friend, her presence would have symbolic significance that wouldn't be lost on my father. You look exhausted, she noted as I slid into the seat across from her. But determined. You found something in that safety deposit box, didn't you? I nodded, keeping my voice low despite the privacy of our corner table. Everything. Mother documented it all. The fraud, the manipulation, even Meredith's involvement in altering her medical care to facilitate the document forgery. Angela closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. I knew she was gathering evidence, but I had no idea about the medical manipulation. That's monstrous. It gets worse, I said, and explained about the video my mother had recorded, the direct testimony about what she had witnessed and suspected. By the time I finished, Angela's expression had hardened into something fierce. What can I do? Come with me tomorrow night, I said. Be there when it all comes to light. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Camilla would be proud of you, Mavis. This isn't just about your inheritance anymore. This is about justice. Justice, I echoed. The word felt right. This wasn't merely revenge. It was accountability, long overdue. As I returned home that night, a text arrived from an unknown number. Package delivered to all parties. Set for synchronized release at 9 p.m. tomorrow. No stopping it now. Jack's confirmation. The evidence was now in the hands of journalists, regulators, and law enforcement, scheduled for automatic release during the height of the gala. The moment when my sister would be accepting her Humanitarian Leadership Award. I slept surprisingly well that night, the calm that comes with certainty. Tomorrow would change everything, and I was ready. The day of the gala arrived with an unseasonable downpour that sent sheets of rain cascading down the glass walls of my apartment. Appropriate weather, I thought, for the storm I was about to unleash. Everything was in place. Jack had confirmed that all recipients had acknowledged receipt of the sealed evidence packages with instructions not to open them until precisely 9 p.m. Trey had positioned our legal team to handle the inevitable. Questions from clients and investors. Angela was prepared to accompany me as a living reminder of my mother's presence. Yet as I stood by the window watching the rain, an unexpected weight settled in my chest. Doubt, not about the justness of my cause, but about its cost. Once this was done, there would be no returning to whatever passed for normal in the Reynolds family. The bridges I was about to burn would leave nothing but ash. My phone rang, displaying Trey's name. Just checking in, he said when I answered. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I replied automatically. Bullshit, he countered, his tone gentler than his words. Nobody would be fine on the day they're about to expose their father and sister for financial crimes and medical fraud. I sighed, grateful for his candor. I keep thinking about the collateral damage, the employees who will lose jobs, the clients who will lose confidence, the extended family who will be tainted by association. That's not on you, Trey said firmly. That's on Lance and Meredith. They made these choices. created these vulnerabilities. You're just bringing them to light. No, I said. Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally, you're still a daughter, still a sister, even after everything they've done. He paused. It's okay to feel conflicted, Mavis. It would be weird if you didn't. After we hung up, I tried to focus on practical matters, reviewing talking points for the inevitable media inquiries, checking in with Jack about final preparations, confirming details with Angela about our arrival time. At 4 p.m., my personal shopper delivered the gown I had requested, a deep emerald silk that complemented my coloring while standing out among the predictable blacks and reds that dominated these events, power dressing for what would undoubtedly be the most significant night of my professional life. At 6:30, my car arrived to take me to Angela's apartment, where she was waiting in a striking silver ensemble that made her look like visiting royalty. Her eyes widened appreciatively when she saw me. "You look ready for battle," she commented as we settled into the back seat. "In a way, I am," I admitted. The Reynolds Charity Gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the few venues in the city grand enough to satisfy my father's ego. As our car joined the line of limousines and luxury sedans approaching the entrance, I took a deep breath, centering myself for what was to come. The Great Hall had been transformed for the evening with elaborate floral arrangements, strategically placed lighting, and a small orchestra playing tasteful classical music. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while New York's elite engaged in the ritualistic networking that was the true purpose of these events. Angela and I had barely entered when I spotted my father holding court near the main staircase, surrounded by the usual cadre of admirers and sycophants. His eyes met mine across the room, widening slightly in surprise at the sight of Angela beside me. He excused himself from his group and made his way toward us. "Mavis," he acknowledged, then turned to Angela with a carefully neutral expression. "Ms. Winters, it's been some time." "Lance," she replied coolly. "Still living in denial of reality, I see." His smile tightened. "I assume you're here as Mavis's guest? How unexpected." "Mother would have wanted her here," I interjected, given how close they were. A flash of something, annoyance, worry, crossed his features before the mask of civility returned. "Of course. Well, enjoy the evening. Meredith will be pleased you both made it." As he walked away, Angela squeezed my arm. "He's nervous. You can see it in how tightly he's holding his shoulders." I nodded, scanning the room for Meredith. I spotted her near the donation display, resplendent in a ruby-red gown that probably cost more than a middle-class family's monthly mortgage. Luca stood beside her, handsome and hollow in his tuxedo, like an expensive mannequin. I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m., just over an hour until everything changed. We made our way to our table, prominently positioned near the stage as befitting our platinum sponsorship. I recognized several faces among the other guests, board members from Reynolds Financial, major clients, the kind of wealthy philanthropists who attended these events more for visibility than charity. At 8:15, dinner was served, an elaborate multi-course affair designed to impress rather than satisfy. I ate mechanically, my mind focused on the countdown. Angela maintained light conversation with the others at our table, her academic credentials and sharp wit making her an unexpected hit among the finance-heavy crowd. At 8:45, my phone vibrated, with a text from Jack. "All systems go. Packages scheduled to open in 15 minutes." I excused myself to visit the restroom, needing a moment alone to prepare. In the elegant marble sanctuary, I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. The woman who looked back at me appeared calm, composed, ready, but inside, my heart was racing. As I was about to leave, the door opened and Meredith entered. For a moment, we both froze, surprised by the encounter. Then her features arranged themselves into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are," she said. "I've been trying to catch you all evening. How are you feeling about our discussion yesterday?" "Looking forward to hearing more details," I replied, matching her artificial warmth. "The foundation position sounds interesting." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Mavis. For a while there, I was worried you might do something drastic." "Drastic?" I echoed, keeping my expression neutral. "You know how you can be when you feel slighted," she said, her tone confidential, as if we were sharing a sister's understanding. "Daddy was concerned you might try to make trouble over the inheritance situation." "What kind of trouble could I possibly make?" I asked, genuinely curious about what she suspected. She shrugged. "Elegantly? Who knows? Legal challenges, public complaints, the kind of messy drama that reflects poorly on everyone." Her smile sharpened. "But that's not your style, is it? You've always been the practical one, the rational one." If only she knew what was about to happen. I checked my watch surreptitiously. 8:52 p.m. 8 minutes until the coordinated release. "Your award presentation is soon, isn't it?" I asked, eager to end this conversation before I gave something away. "Yes, right after the main fundraising appeal," she confirmed. "You'll be there to applaud, I hope." "I wouldn't miss it," I assured. Her. As we returned to the main hall, I noticed something unusual. Several guests checking their phones with identical expressions of confusion, then concern. A murmur was spreading through the crowd, barely perceptible beneath the orchestra's playing but unmistakable to someone listening for it. I frowned, checking my own phone. The screen showed 8:55 p.m. The packages weren't supposed to open for another 5 minutes. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a message from Jack. "Something's wrong. Packages opened early. System compromised." My stomach dropped. The carefully orchestrated release, timed to coincide with Meredith's award acceptance, was happening ahead of schedule. The element of perfect theatrical timing was lost. Worse, as I looked around the room, I saw several members of the Reynolds Financial Board huddled together, gesturing urgently at their phones. My father was approaching them, his expression concerned. One of them showed him his screen, and my father's face went ashen. He looked up, his eyes searching the room until they found me. The look he gave me was one I had never seen before. A mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. They knew. Already. Before the public announcement, before the planned confrontation, before I could control the narrative. My phone buzzed again. Jack. "Security breach in distribution system. Someone got to one of our media contacts. Whole timeline accelerated." And then confirming my worst fears, a final message. Reynolds' PR team already issuing denial statements. They were prepared. For this. Somehow they had known what was coming. Not just suspected, known. Enough to have prepared counterstatements. Enough to possibly have compromised our distribution system. The perfect plan was unraveling before my eyes. The carefully constructed moment of justice dissolving into chaos. In the confusion of alerts and whispers spreading through the gala, I stood motionless, watching as my father gathered his executive team in an urgent huddle. Meredith approached them, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as one of them showed her his phone. She looked up, finding me across the room with unerring accuracy, her eyes narrowing with cold fury. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. My attempt to orchestrate a public reckoning had failed. The element of surprise was gone. The coordinated impact was diluted. And my family, masters of manipulation and damage control, were already mobilizing to contain the situation. Everything had gone wrong, and I had no backup plan. For a moment, I stood frozen as the carefully constructed plan collapsed around me. The murmurs were growing louder, the confused glances more frequent. Soon the entire gala would erupt into chaos as the news spread beyond the initial recipients. Angela appeared at my side, her expression grave. "Something's happening," she said quietly. "What's wrong?" "They knew," I whispered, still watching. My father and sister huddled with their team. "Someone warned them. The evidence released early, and they already have prepared statements." Angela's eyes narrowed. "How is that possible? Who could have—" She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze fixed on something across the room. I followed her line of sight and felt my breath catch. Gabriel Morton had just entered the gala, moving purposefully toward my father. Gabriel, who had claimed he wouldn't be at the event. Gabriel, who had warned me that my family knew we had spoken. Gabriel, who had access to every detail of the Reynolds family's legal affairs, and who had given me my mother's letter after 5 years of silence. "Oh my God," I breathed. It was Gabriel. He played both sides. Angela gripped my arm. "Mavis, you need to move quickly. If your family's prepared, they'll try to control the narrative. Once they do, it will be nearly impossible to wrest it back." She was right. Already, I could see my father speaking urgently into his phone while Meredith conferred with the Reynolds financial PR director. They would be crafting their defensive strategy, preparing to dismiss the evidence as fabricated, the accusations as the bitter revenge of a disinherited daughter. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They didn't know about the second thumb drive, the one my mother had hidden in the First Century Trust safety deposit box, the one containing her video testimony. My mother's face, her voice, her direct accusation of what my father and sister had done, that couldn't be dismissed as easily as documents that could be claimed as forgeries. I pulled out my phone and called Jack. "They knew," I said when he answered. "Gabriel Morton tipped them off." "Damn it," Jack muttered. "That explains the breach, but we still have most of the plan intact. The SEC, law enforcement, major financial publications, they all have the evidence. This isn't over. We need to accelerate the release of my mother's video," I told him. "Right now, before they can establish their counter-narrative." "Are you sure?" Jack asked. "That was supposed to be our second wave, after the initial reports created momentum." "We don't have that luxury anymore," I replied. "Send it now, to everyone." While Jack worked to distribute the video, I scanned the room for Trey. He had arrived. Separately, maintaining professional distance as we had agreed. I spotted him near the bar, already on his phone, likely dealing with the fallout from the early release. As I started toward him, a hand caught my arm. Meredith, her perfectly made up, face tight with fury. "What have you done?" she hissed, fingers digging into my skin. I met her gaze steadily, nothing that wasn't long overdue. "You think this little stunt will accomplish anything?" Her voice was low, controlled despite her obvious rage. "We have statements ready to go, lawyers standing by. By morning, this will be dismissed as the desperate attack of a disgruntled family member." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "if all I had were documents and financial records." Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Mother made a video, Meredith, before she died, detailing everything, the fraud, the manipulation of her care, the forged documents. Her testimony, in her own words." The color drained from Meredith's face. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Check your phone in about 2 minutes." I pulled my arm free and continued toward Trey, leaving Meredith standing stunned in my wake. When I reached him, his expression told me he was already aware of the shifting situation. "Gabriel?" he asked, simply. I nodded. "But we're countering with the video. Jack's distributing it now." Trey grimaced. "This is going to get ugly fast. Lance Reynolds isn't going to go down without a fight." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "The harder he fights, the more desperate he'll appear." Before Trey could respond, a strange hush fell over one corner of the room. I turned to see several people staring at their phones, expressions shocked. One woman had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. It had begun. My mother's video was reaching its audience. Across the room, my father was still on his phone, oblivious to the new development. Meredith, however, was watching the spreading reaction with growing horror. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, and for the first time in our adult lives, I saw something I had never expected: fear. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack, video going viral. News outlets picking it up. This is bigger than we anticipated. Of course it was. This wasn't just financial fraud anymore. This was a dying woman's testimony about her own daughter manipulating her medical care to facilitate forgery. It was personal, visceral, impossible to dismiss with prepared statements and legal jargon. The orchestra had stopped playing. The murmurs had grown into open conversations. People were showing their phones to each other, expressions ranging from disturbed to outraged. I saw the exact moment my father realized something had changed. He lowered his phone, frowning at the strange behavior rippling through the gala. A board member approached him, showing him something on a screen. My father's face went from confused to stricken in an instant. He looked up, finding me in the crowd with the unerring accuracy that had always made me feel transparent as a child. But now, for the first time, I didn't shrink under his gaze. I met it evenly, without flinching. In that moment, I understood something fundamental that had eluded me throughout my preparation for this night. This wasn't about the inheritance. It had never been about the money, the properties, or even the company. This was about truth, about accountability, about standing up after a lifetime of being pushed down. The event organizer was on stage now, desperately trying to maintain some semblance of order, announcing that the award ceremony would proceed as planned, but no one was listening. The gala was disintegrating into clusters of shocked conversations and hurried departures. Angela appeared at my side, her expression a mixture of vindication and sorrow. "Your mother would be proud," she said quietly. "This isn't how she wanted things to end, but she would be proud that you found the strength to stand up for the truth." I nodded, unexpectedly moved by her words. "I just wish that it hadn't come to this," Angela finished for me. "That's what makes you different from them, Mavis. Despite everything, you still wish there had been another way." My phone was buzzing constantly now. Messages from Jack with updates on the spreading story, texts from colleagues and acquaintances at the gala, even alerts from news apps as major outlets began picking up the story. One message stood out, from Gabriel Morton. "I'm sorry. They threatened my family, but I made sure your mother's letter reached you. I tried to balance the scales, so that was it. Not pure betrayal, but the complicated reality of a man caught between powerful forces. I couldn't forgive him, not yet, but I could understand." The stage manager was approaching Meredith now, clearly trying to determine if she still wanted to proceed with her award acceptance. She shook her head sharply, gesturing toward an exit. Luca appeared beside her, his expression grim as he escorted her away from the increasingly chaotic scene. My father, however, wasn't retreating. To my surprise, he was walking directly toward me, his expression unreadable. The crowd parted before him, conversations quieting as people realized what was happening. When he reached me, he stopped just beyond arm's length, studying me with an intensity I recognized from board meetings and tough negotiations. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice low but clear. "Decades of work, the company, the family name, all of it." "No, Father," I replied steadily. "You destroyed it. I just revealed the truth." "Truth," he scoffed. "You have no idea what it takes to build something like Reynolds Financial. The compromises, the difficult choices." "Fraud isn't a difficult choice," I countered. "Neither is manipulating a dying woman's care to facilitate forgery." His jaw tightened. Your mother was confused at the end, paranoid. You've built this entire crusade on the delusions of a sick woman. Something cold and clarifying washed through me. Even now, facing exposure and ruin, he couldn't acknowledge the truth, couldn't take responsibility for his actions or the damage he had caused. Her video testimony says otherwise, I said simply. As do the documents, the financial records, and the statements from witnesses. It's over, Father. All of it. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that he had finally encountered an obstacle he couldn't overcome through intimidation or manipulation. She deserves it more than you, he said finally, the same words he had used when explaining my disinheritance. But now they sounded hollow, petulant, the last defense of a man who had run out of justifications. That's where you've always been. Wrong, I replied. This was never about what anyone deserved. It was about what was right. I turned away from him then, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Behind me, I heard him call my name once, his voice containing an emotion I couldn't identify. But I didn't look back. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ash. The gala was disintegrating around us. Waitstaff stood awkwardly with trays of untouched champagne while guests hurried toward exits, phones pressed to ears. The charity auction items, luxury vacations, designer jewelry, priceless art, sat abandoned on display tables, forgotten in the wake of a much more compelling drama. I felt strangely calm as I watched it unfold. The anxiety that had accompanied me throughout the planning stages had evaporated, replaced by a clear-eyed certainty. Whatever happened next, the truth was out. My mother's voice had finally been heard. We should go, Angela suggested, eyeing the growing media presence at the entrance. Unless you want to make a statement tonight. I considered it briefly. Part of me, the part that had endured decades of dismissal and favoritism, wanted to stand before the cameras and tell my side of the story. But a wiser instinct prevailed. Not tonight, I decided. Let the evidence speak for itself first. As we made our way toward a side exit, I spotted Meredith and Luca attempting to leave through the same door. For a moment, it seemed we would be forced into an awkward confrontation. But then Meredith noticed me and abruptly changed direction, pulling Luca with her toward a different exit. Even now, she was avoiding any public acknowledgement of the situation. Classic Meredith, always focused on appearances, on maintaining the facade regardless of the reality beneath it. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city with that particular gleam that follows a heavy downpour. Our car was waiting as arranged, and as Angela and I settled into the back seat, my phone rang with Trey's number. It's everywhere, he said without preamble. Every financial news outlet, major networks, social media. Your mother's video is being called the most damning whistleblower testimony since the 2008 financial crisis. What's the reaction? I asked. Reynolds Financial stock is halted from trading. The SEC has issued a statement confirming an ongoing investigation. 3 board members have already resigned. It's a complete implosion. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the magnitude of what was happening. And our clients? Nervous but stable, Trey reported. The team is making calls, assuring them that Blackwood is well positioned to weather any market turbulence. Some of Reynolds's clients are already reaching out to us, actually. Don't be predatory, I cautioned. We need to be seen as the ethical alternative, not vultures circling a carcass. Agreed, Trey said. Tasteful outreach only, focused on stability and compliance. Where are you headed now? I glanced at Angela, who was watching me with quiet concern. Home, I decided. There's nothing more I can do tonight. After ending the call, I sat in silence for several minutes, watching the city pass by through the car window. The adrenaline that had carried me through the evening was ebbing, leaving behind a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. Are you all right? Angela asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. I've been focused on this moment for so long, I haven't really thought about what comes after. She patted my hand. That's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you've done what Camilla hoped you would do. You've exposed the truth she tried to protect. You with. At my apartment, I invited Angela up for a nightcap. Neither of us was ready to be alone with our thoughts, and her connection to my mother made her presence comforting in a way few others could be. As we sipped scotch in my living room, my phone continued to buzz with messages and alerts. I ignored most of them, but one text from Jack caught my attention. Your father just issued a statement denying everything and claiming you manipulated your mother's video, calling for investigation into your actions. I showed it to Angela, who shook her head in disgust. Typical Lance. He'll deny reality until his last breath. He doesn't know when to stop, I agreed. But it won't work this time. The evidence is too comprehensive, too well documented. What happens to him now? Angela asked. Legally, I mean. I considered the question. Best case scenario for him? He resigns from Reynolds Financial, pays massive fines, and avoids criminal charges. Worst case? Federal prison for fraud, tax evasion, and possibly conspiracy related to mother's medical care. And Meredith? Similar, I said. Though she might claim she was just following orders. Either way, their reputations are destroyed. The Reynolds name is toxic now. Angela studied me over the rim of her glass. And how do you feel about that? It was the question I had been avoiding even in my own thoughts. How did I feel about potentially sending my father and sister to prison? About dismantling the company my grandfather had built? About the collateral? Damage to employees, clients, and associates? Conflicted, I admitted finally. I believe they deserve consequences for what they did, but I take no joy in their destruction. Angela nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. That's what separates you from them, Mavis. They would have reveled in your downfall. You simply want justice. After Angela left, I stood at my window overlooking the city, watching the lights flicker in distant buildings. Somewhere out there, my father was probably huddled with lawyers, crafting desperate strategies to save himself. Meredith was likely doing the same, perhaps already preparing to distance herself from decisions she had eagerly participated in. My phone rang again, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mavis? It was Luca, Meredith's husband. His voice was strained, uncertain. I need to talk to you. About what? I asked, wary of any overture from my sister's camp. Meredith doesn't know I'm calling, he said quickly. But things are escalating here. Your father is talking about destroying documents, moving assets offshore. They're panicking. This was unexpected. Why are you telling me this? There was a long pause. Because I have two children who deserve better than to watch their grandfather and mother go to prison for financial crimes. Because what they did to your mother was unforgivable. Because someone in this family needs to do the right thing for once. I considered his words carefully. Luca had always seemed like a background figure, handsome arm candy for Meredith's social appearances. I had never considered that he might have his own opinions about the family dynamics. What are you suggesting? I asked. A meeting, he said. Tomorrow morning. I have documents that weren't in your mother's collection. Things that implicate others beyond your father and Meredith. Things that could help ensure the responsible parties face consequences while limiting the collateral damage. My mind raced. If Luca was telling the truth, his information could be invaluable in focusing the investigation, potentially even protecting innocent employees and shareholders from the worst of the fallout. Why would you betray them like this? I asked, still skeptical of his motivation. He laughed, a hollow sound. Betray them? Mavis, they've been betraying everyone, including me, for years. Your mother tried to warn me once, but I didn't listen. Maybe if I had, things would be different now. The mention of my mother caught me off guard. She spoke to you? About what? About the kind of people they really are, he said simply. About how the Reynolds family business worked. I dismissed it as the concerns of an overprotective mother-in-law. I was wrong. I agreed to meet him the following morning at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from the financial district where reporters would be swarming. As I ended the call, I felt a subtle shift in my perspective. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing anymore. It was about shaping what came after. For the first time since discovering my disinheritance, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had previously dismissed. That I might have a role to play in rebuilding what my family had corrupted, not for my father or sister's sake, but for my grandfather's legacy, for the innocent employees, and for my own sense of resolution. I had transformed from the overlooked daughter seeking justice to someone with the power to influence what rose from the ashes of Reynolds Financial. The responsibility was sobering, but also strangely fitting. As I finally prepared for bed in the early hours of the morning, I noticed a text from an unknown number. You were always stronger than both of I. Yes. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. It was signed simply Angela, but I knew it wasn't from Angela Winters. It was from my mother's other friend, Angela Taylor, the reporter from the Times who had been trying to reach me for weeks. The message she had carried from my mother all this time was finally delivered. And with it came the certainty that whatever came next, I was ready to face it on my own terms. The morning after the gala, New York awoke to headlines that read like something from a financial thriller. Reynolds' empire implodes. Fraud, forgery, and family betrayal. The story was everywhere. Television news, newspapers, social media, financial terminals. My mother's video testimony had been viewed millions of times overnight. I arrived at the Brooklyn Cafe 20 minutes early, selecting a quiet corner table with a clear view of both entrances. Despite Luca's apparent sincerity, caution seemed prudent. I had asked Trey to wait nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary, far enough to allow privacy. At precisely 10 a.m., Luca arrived alone, carrying a slim briefcase. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usual polished appearance marred by dark circles and a day's stubble. He scanned the room briefly before spotting me. "Thank you for meeting," he said as he took the seat across from me. His accent, usually so carefully maintained, had slipped slightly with exhaustion. "You said you have documents," I prompted, not wanting to waste time on pleasantries. He nodded, unlocking his briefcase. "These were in a private safe at our house. Meredith doesn't know I found them years ago." He withdrew a folder and slid it across the table. Bank transfers, offshore account details, and most importantly, a list of everyone involved in the scheme. Board members, lawyers, accountants, even certain government officials who were paid to look the other way. I opened the folder, scanning its contents with growing astonishment. The list of conspirators was longer than I had anticipated, including names of respected financial leaders I would never have suspected. "Why did you keep these?" I asked, looking up at him. His smile was bitter. "Insurance." I realized early in our marriage that Meredith saw me as an accessory, not a partner. I needed leverage in case things went south. "And now?" "Now I want to protect my children from the worst of this," he said simply. "They don't deserve to suffer for their mother's and grandfather's crimes." I studied him, searching for deception but finding only exhaustion and resignation. "These will help focus the investigation on the actual perpetrators," I acknowledged, "but they won't save Meredith or my father." "I know," he said quietly. "Nothing can do that now. The evidence is too overwhelming." As we were speaking, the cafe's television switched to breaking news. The volume was low, but the chyron was clear. "SEC freezes Reynolds financial assets. Criminal charges expected." Luca glanced at the screen, then back at me. It's moving faster than I expected. Financial. Crimes involving major institutions always do, I replied. The regulators can't risk appearing lenient. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. There's one more thing you should know. Your father called an emergency board meeting for noon today. He's planning to invoke a rare bylaw that would allow him to dissolve the company rather than surrender. Control. This was alarming, not just for the financial implications, but for what it revealed about my father's state of mind. He would rather destroy Reynolds Financial entirely than see it continue without him at the helm. That's corporate suicide, I said. The shareholders would never. The majority shareholders are family trusts he controls, Luca cut in. He has the votes. I checked my watch. Just over 2 hours until the meeting. Where is it being held? Reynolds Financial Headquarters. The main boardroom. I gathered the documents quickly, my mind racing. If my father dissolved the company, thousands would lose their jobs overnight. Client accounts would be frozen during liquidation. The market impact would extend far beyond Reynolds Financial itself. I have to stop him, I said, standing. How? Luca asked. You have no standing at Reynolds Financial anymore, I smiled grimly. Don't I? According to my grandfather's provision in the company charter, in cases of criminal malfeasance by the CEO, control reverts to qualified family members not implicated in wrongdoing. Recognition dawned on his face. You're going to claim control of the company. I'm going to save what can be saved, I corrected. For the employees, the clients, and my grandfather's legacy. As I turned to leave, Luca called after me. Mavis, for what it's worth, you were always the better Reynolds. Even Meredith knew it, though she'd never admit it. I nodded once in acknowledgement, then strode out of the cafe, already calling Trey to update him on the situation. The next 90 minutes were a blur of activity, conferring with lawyers about the charter provision, briefing key Blackwood executives about potential market impacts, and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important confrontation of my professional life. By the time my car pulled up outside Reynolds Financial Headquarters, a media circus had formed. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras ready, shouting questions at anyone who entered or exited the building. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, straightened my jacket, and walked directly toward the entrance. For a moment, there was confusion, as the reporters tried to place me. Then recognition hit. Mavis Reynolds, someone shouted. Are you here to comment on the allegations against your family? I paused briefly, facing the cameras with the calm confidence that had become my armor over years of navigating male-dominated boardrooms. I'm here to ensure that the actions of a few don't destroy what thousands of honest employees have built, I said clearly. Reynolds Financial is more than one man's company. It's time everyone remembered that. And with that, I walked through the doors, ready to face my father one final time, not as the overlooked daughter, but as the rightful guardian of our family's true legacy. The Reynolds Financial boardroom fell silent as I pushed open the heavy double doors. 14 pairs of eyes turned toward me. 12 board members, my father at the head of the table, and Meredith beside him. Their expressions ranged from shock to outright hostility. This is a private meeting, my father said coldly. Security will escort you out. I walked calmly to the opposite end of the table, placing my briefcase on the polished surface. Actually, I have every right to be here. Article 7, Section 3 of the original company charter states that in cases of criminal malfeasance by the chief executive, control of the company reverts to the board with preference given to qualified family members not implicated in the wrongdoing. One of the board members, Janet Wilson, a shrewd corporate attorney who had always treated me with grudging respect, leaned forward. Is that provision still valid? The charter has been amended numerous times. The provision was never removed, I confirmed. I've had 3 separate legal teams verify it this morning. It stands. This is absurd, my father snapped, his face flushing with anger. You can't just walk in here and claim control based on some obscure technicality. It's not a technicality, I replied evenly. It's a safeguard my grandfather put in place specifically to prevent what you're attempting to do today. Destroy the company rather than surrender control. Murmurs spread around the table. The board members exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by my knowledge of their agenda. You have no proof of criminal activity, Meredith interjected, her voice brittle. These are baseless allegations that will be disproven. I opened my briefcase and withdrew copies of the documents Luca had provided, along with additional evidence from my mother's safety deposit box. The SEC, FBI, and New York Attorney General's office disagree, as do the financial records witness, testimonies, and mother's video statement. I distributed the packets to each board member. You should all be aware that this meeting is being monitored by regulatory authorities. Any attempt to dissolve the company or transfer assets at this point would constitute additional criminal violations. The atmosphere in the room shifted, perceptibly as the board members flipped through the evidence. Janet Wilson removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. Lance, she said, addressing my father, is this accurate? Were client funds diverted to offshore accounts? My father's jaw tightened. I don't have to answer that. Actually, you do, came a new voice from the doorway. Camilla Joy from the SEC stood there, flanked by 2 federal agents. Lance Reynolds, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The room erupted into chaos. 2 board members immediately stood and distanced themselves from my father. Another began frantically texting, likely calling his own attorney. Meredith sat frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking as the reality of the situation hit her. As the agents approached my father, he looked directly at me, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face: rage, disbelief, and something that might have been a grudging respect. You really are Harrison's granddaughter, he said quietly. He would have approved. Before I could respond, the agents were reading him his rights, placing handcuffs on his wrists. Another agent approached Meredith, who had begun to cry, mascara, tracking down her carefully made-up face. I felt no satisfaction watching them being led away, only a profound sense of finality, of a chapter closing. Janet Wilson cleared her throat. Given the circumstances, I move that we invoke Article 7, Section 3 of the Charter, and appoint Mavis Reynolds as interim chief executive to stabilize the company pending full investigation and reorganization. The vote was unanimous. Within minutes, I found myself officially in control of Reynolds Financial, the position I had once dreamed of, now attained under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. I addressed the executive team, many of whom looked shell-shocked by the morning's events. I spoke with key clients, assuring them their assets were secure. I met with the communications department to craft a statement that acknowledged the severity of the situation while emphasizing the company's commitment to rectifying past wrongs. By late afternoon, I stood in what had been my father's office, looking out at the city skyline. My phone had been buzzing constantly, journalists seeking comments, industry colleagues expressing shock or support, Trey checking in regularly. One message gave me pause, from Angela Winters. Camilla is watching. Over you today. She always knew this moment would come. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Janet Wilson, looking weary but resolute. The board has approved your emergency stabilization plan, she said. It won't be easy, but most of us believe the company can survive this. Thank you, I replied. I know today has been difficult for everyone. She studied me with shrewd eyes. You could have destroyed Reynolds Financial completely. Most people would have, after what your father and sister did to you. Why didn't you? I considered the question carefully. Because this company isn't just about my father. It's about my grandfather's vision, about the thousands of people who work here, About doing things the right way. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think Harrison would be proud. The Reynolds name might actually mean something honorable again. After she left, I returned to the window, watching the city lights begin to emerge as dusk approached. Today marked both an ending and a beginning. My father and Meredith would face justice for their actions. Reynolds Financial would undergo painful but necessary restructuring, and I would have to decide what role, if any, I wanted in its future. My phone buzzed with a text from Trey. "Dinner? You shouldn't be alone tonight." I smiled slightly and replied, "Yes, I have a lot to tell you about what comes next." Because for the first time in years, I was looking forward rather than back. The inheritance that had been stolen from me had been reclaimed. Not just the material assets, but something far more valuable. My rightful place in my grandfather's legacy and the opportunity to rebuild it with integrity. The overlooked daughter had finally been seen. And in the end, that visibility had proven more powerful than any fortune could ever be. 6 months after the day that changed everything, I stood on the observation deck of the Reynolds Financial Building, watching the autumn sunset paint the city in gold and crimson. So much had happened in those months, more than I could have imagined when I first discovered my disinheritance. My father had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with authorities investigating broader corruption in the financial sector. He would serve 5 years in a minimum security facility, followed by supervised release. The man who had once ruled New York finance was now inmate 87294, stripped of his empire and his freedom. Meredith had fared slightly better legally, receiving 3 years of house arrest and substantial fines after her lawyers successfully argued that she had acted under our father's influence. But her social standing, the currency she valued above all else, was irreparably damaged. The humanitarian award she had been set to receive was rescinded. The charity boards she had chaired asked for her resignation. The friends who had once competed for her attention now pretended they had never known her. Luca had filed for divorce and custody of their children, using the evidence he provided to support his claim that Meredith was an unfit mother. I had mixed feelings about this. While I had no love for my sister, the thought of her children being used as pawns in the aftermath troubled me. I had reached out to Luca, suggesting a more balanced approach that would protect the children while not completely severing their relationship with their mother. As for Reynolds Financial, the company had survived, albeit in a transformed state. The board had voted to rename it Harrison Financial, honoring my grandfather while creating distance from the scandal. Nearly a third of the executive team had been replaced. New compliance systems had been implemented. A substantial settlement fund had been established for clients whose accounts had been mismanaged, and I had made my most difficult decision yet. "There you are," came Trey's voice from behind me. "The board members are getting restless. They're not used to waiting." I smiled, turning to face him. "Let them wait a few more minutes. I needed some air before making it official." He joined me at the railing, our shoulders nearly touching as we looked out over the city. "Having second thoughts?" "No," I said truthfully. "It's the right decision. For everyone." The "it" in question was my resignation as interim CEO of Harrison Financial. After 6 months of stabilizing the company, implementing reforms, and restoring client confidence, I had decided to step down rather than pursue the permanent position the board had offered. "Are you sure?" Trey asked, studying my profile. "You've done remarkable work here. The company's actually stronger now than it was before the scandal." "I'm sure," I confirmed. "I was never meant to run my grandfather's company. I was meant to save it, and then let it find its own path forward." My decision had surprised many, but it felt right in a way I couldn't fully articulate. I had proven what I needed to prove, to myself, to the industry, and even to my father. I had reclaimed my rightful place in the family legacy. But staying permanently would have meant living in the shadow of that legacy forever. Besides, I added, Blackwood needs its CFO back. And I have plans for us that will keep you plenty busy. Trey grinned. The Asian expansion? I nodded. My time at Harrison had given me insights into markets and opportunities that Blackwood was perfectly positioned to pursue. The future I envisioned wasn't about competing with my family's company anymore. It was about building something entirely new. We should go in, I said finally. I've kept them waiting long enough. The boardroom where I had confronted my father 6 months ago was now filled with a different energy. The remaining original board members, along with their newly appointed colleagues, stood as I entered. Janet Wilson, now serving as chairperson, approached with a small wrapped package. Before you make your announcement, we wanted to give you something, she said, handing me the gift. A token of our appreciation for what you've done here. I unwrapped it carefully to find a framed black and white photograph of my grandfather standing in front of the original Reynolds Financial Office, a modest storefront that had grown into the skyscraper we now occupied. His expression was serious but hopeful, a man with a vision for the future. He would have been proud, Janet said quietly. Not just of what you accomplished, but of how you did it. With integrity. I thanked her, genuinely moved by the gesture, then addressed the waiting board members. My resignation speech was brief but heartfelt, expressing confidence in their ability to carry Harrison Financial forward while I returned to my role at Blackwood Capital. Afterward, as Trey and I walked through the lobby for what would be my final time as CEO, I noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. Angela Winters, elegant as always in a crimson coat. I thought I'd escort you on your last day, she said, embracing me warmly. Camilla would have wanted to be here. She is, in a way, I replied, thinking of how my mother's foresight and courage had made all of this possible. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and invigorating. The three of us walked together toward a nearby restaurant where we had reservations to mark the occasion. Not as a celebration of ending something, but of beginning something new. Have you heard from Meredith at all? Angela asked as we waited at a crosswalk. I shook my head. Not directly. Her lawyers have reached out about some family assets, but she hasn't attempted personal contact. And are you okay with that? She pressed gently. I considered the question carefully. I am. Some relationships can't be repaired, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the foundation was never there to begin with. The light changed, and we crossed the street together. Ahead of us lay the restaurant, warm light spilling from its windows. Behind us stood the towering reminder of what had been lost and found, destroyed and rebuilt. So what now, Mavis Reynolds? Angela asked, linking her arm through mine. What does the future hold for the woman who took on the Reynolds empire and won? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. That's the beauty of it, I replied. For the first time in my life, I get to decide that for myself. And in that moment, I knew that was the true inheritance I had reclaimed. Not money or property or company shares, but the freedom to write my own story, unburdened by others' expectations or limitations. In the end, that was worth more than any fortune could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.